Hi everybody, welcome to another edition of GFIS National Solutions Chit Chat. Today I have Bevis Allen on. Bevis, how are you doing?
Good. Yeah, I mean, a couple of days ago we had the very shock news that London was placed into Tier 4, which effectively means Christmas is cancelled for most of us. So it's so I think most people, myself included, still trying to get our head around that
Yes.
and what that means. Yeah.
We were having a quick joke about football before, and I think I saw a little meme went around very late last night, which said London going into Tier 4 is almost as quick as Tottenham going from first to fourth as well.
Nearly as quick, yeah.
Not sure if you're a Tottenham fan or not, so apologies for any Tottenham fans out there.
I'm a QPR fan, even worse, because we're struggling at the bottom.
Yeah, let's not talk football there.
Yeah.
Fab. So thank you very much for joining us. This week is all about looking at the vulnerability of sports people and athletes and generally people in general. I think sometimes we kind of go, oh, sports people are over here. Well, we're just people. In the light of day, we're just people trying to get through things, and we get involved in something that people put us on a pedestal. In some sports, if you perform really well, you've got people watching you. I had a conversation last week with a Premier League football player, and we were talking about nobody goes and watch the postman do his job. You don't have 40,000 people watching the postman kind of going up each path going, oh, that was a wrong move and he should have moved faster away from the dog. We don't get that. Yeah. But this whole vulnerability is just a humanity thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's funny because as you're talking that, obviously, because boxing, my game, as I'll talk about in a bit. And when you're in the corner, certainly the pro fights, there's a microphone there and everything you say can be heard. When the manager of a football club is at half time, no one hears what he says to the team. Yeah. So it doesn't get scrutinised. But in the corner, and I've done it myself, where I've heard other coaches say something, why did he give him that advice? He wasn't even thinking what was going, you know what I mean? So it does add another layer of scrutiny when not just how you perform, but also the advice you give to your athlete is scrutinised and the whole world can kind of hear it and think, actually, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, and it's off the cuff. And we were talking about today's session in terms of having a little chat. And none of this has been scripted and none of the chit chats have, because I think in the real world, you don't have time to do that. You haven't got time to kind of go, let me just go and speak to somebody else, write the script out and come back and give you the response. It's literally live, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly it. And you got to think on your feet, and you almost got to forget that there's people around you who are listening in, and people have asked me, don't you get kind of insecure when I don't see the camera, I don't see the microphone, you're just focusing on what you're focusing, which is the athlete at that given moment.
Fab. So Bevis, your sport is boxing, and we'll get to that in a minute. I guess this week talking about vulnerability with athletes and individuals as people. There's a couple of big cases, isn't there, within boxing regarding vulnerability and mental health. And I just happened to be watching Jonathan Ross on Saturday night. Yeah, apologies for my TV viewing skills. Okay. But yeah, Tyson Fury was on, and he was very open about his mental health issues and about his vulnerability and almost using it as a strength. And then you've got Frank Bruno who had some mental health problems as well. So there's been some quite big sort of case studies with top of the game boxers who've come out and really struggled a little bit. How do you find that in the game yourself?
It's funny because Frank and I spoke at the House of Commons December 2018 around the topic of mental health and boxing and what boxing can offer in terms of supporting young people, well, I guess people in general. Boxing's an interesting one because everybody sees boxing as a really tough game that you have to be almost poker faced, you can't show emotion, and one of the things you can't do in a boxing ring is show that you're hurt. That's in football you see people, excuse football players, but they can roll around as soon as they get touched to win a free kick. In boxing it's almost the opposite, but the danger of that is you can take that into your everyday life, which a lot of us as ex-boxers or current boxers have done, and you kind of put on a brave face to kind of mask things. So I think it's about, I guess, seeing vulnerability not as a weakness but as a strength. It's probably quite key.
Yeah, we were having a chat last week about the fact that tennis and boxing are so very different when you look at them. We'll not go into the affluency of tennis players in terms of, at a young age and how they get into the performance levels, but tennis players come across in their nice whites, and they've got their racket bag, and it seems to be from a nicer area. Boxers have this image of maybe the harder type kid who's coming in, and I guess my thoughts were it's still a one-to-one situation. You're still holding the things inside that you don't want the world to see, and whilst it might be more acceptable for a junior tennis player to cry after losing a match, it's still what's happening intrinsically that is starting that player to mask his emotions, to hide them a little bit, to be less vulnerable to the outside world. Is that the same in the world of boxing?
Absolutely. It wasn't until I became a coach that I realised how emotional boxers were. I mean, I boxed myself for 12 years, and I've been around boxing for practically most of my life. But it was only when I started coaching boxers that I realised actually we're a pretty emotional, up and down bunch, and it is about trying to get your emotions in check at the right time to be able to perform. Because I remember when I was boxing, before every single fight, without fail, I'd sit in the changing room and I'd be looking around and I'd be thinking, what on earth are you doing here? I could run 100 meters in 11 seconds. I was a decent football player. I was good at squash. There were lots of other things I could have been doing. And I thought, why are you here doing this? And then you go out after the fight, win or lose, doesn't matter. You come back in, you think, right, okay, on to the next one. But that kind of fear factor beforehand can either cripple you or kind of move you on to the next phase. But everyone experiences it. But it's only when you talk to other boxers and they say, yeah, I get scared as well. My knees are shaking, my knees are knocking. George Foreman famously said before he fought Joe Fraser in 1973 in Jamaica, that he couldn't stop his knees from shaking when they were doing the pre-fight introductions in the ring. And I thought, no way. And obviously he smashed Fraser in 2 rounds, knocked him down 6 times, but he wouldn't have known that beforehand. So I think all of us kind of experience that fear. It's about trying to control it, I guess, in the right environment.
And by the way, when you look at my name tag on there, there's certainly no relationship to George. Although,
you sure?
Over the years, I have been called George a few times, and I tell this story about him being my great uncle.
Right.
And I lived in Tennessee for 2 years, so I have a lot of relationships down there. And people go, really? And I go, no, absolutely not. Far, but the word you mentioned there was fear. And I spend a lot of time with the athletes that I work with, and also coaches as well, trying to get rid of that word fear. I think we've defined it wrong. And I think we certainly have a physiological response to fear, which is, maybe slightly outdated. So our original fear thoughts were, oh, there's a dinosaur. I either need to run away from the dinosaur, I need to fight the dinosaur, or I'm going to get eaten by the dinosaur. Well, that's real fear, isn't it? There's a lot of danger there. In that decision-making process, there's danger. You have to decide and make a decision quickly, otherwise you're dead. So we understand that, and that's where we're still pretty much wired up. Some of the fear now is more created by the narrative that we write in our own heads. And the boxers do that as well. So you're talking about, George Foreman, they're shaking before fight. Well, if we kind of made a list of his skill set, about what he was good at and how good he was even before that fight, then we could easily justify that actually taking that fight was maybe an okay fight for him. He was at that level. He had the resources and the skills to be able to actually fight at that level. Slightly different if I was fighting at that level. So the resources and the demands equal the same. So it's really interesting to know whether he was just creating a narrative in his head about the fact that what if I get knocked out? What if I get punched in the face? Is that something that you find with boxers, that they're creating that what if moments in their head?
100%. Very often, a lot of boxers are kind of thinking about things which haven't happened. So they're looking into the future. They're kind of thinking, okay, this might happen. And boxing's a unique sport because it's the only sport where you can get laid out in front of your partner. And no one can kind of come to your aid, if you like. You know, it's the whole world sees your vulnerability. Because if you get beaten and you get beaten badly, everybody sees the pain. You know, if you're hit with a tough body shot and you go down wincing in pain, everybody sees that. It's a bit like being at school when you've got the whole school in the playground gathering round while you're getting smashed by the school bully.
Yeah.
So it's a very real thing. But I think not enough boxers look at their strengths beforehand. They start thinking, okay, this guy has got this, you know, he's got 20 knockouts in 20 fights, he's this and that, but they're not focusing on the right things. And I guess the whole thing about everything being in your head, I think is absolutely true. The battle is a mental thing, because I run mental health workshops within the sport of boxing. Mine, the charity, developed a bespoke program for amateur boxing. So I'm one of the deliverers in London and the South East. And one of the things that we always say is that boxing is perhaps as much as 80% mental. I think it might even be slightly more than that, because the whole mental aspect determines how you train, how you prepare, everything. And if the mindset isn't right, then the performance isn't going to be right, no matter how good you are. You know, we've seen great boxers get upset. You know, obviously we saw with Anthony Joshua, we saw with Mike Tyson against Buster Douglas, you know, 42 to 1 underdog. You wouldn't get those odds, you know, in any other sport, and then end up triumphing because the mindset was different on the night.
Yeah, I can't imagine Roger Federer losing to me right now.
Nor me.
Yeah, but then that's sometimes the odds in boxing, isn't it? It's one punch, you know, caught at the right place, and then that's it, game over.
Yeah, absolutely. So it adds, I guess, another level of vulnerability, because you know you're only ever one punch away from disaster, if you like.
Yeah, really interesting in terms of just listening to your answer there regarding the fact that boxing is 80% mental. I think most sport is. Obviously, you know, the mind is such a wonderful thing, but also such a torturous thing for some people as well. As if we know this, then why don't we spend a little bit more money, and why don't we try to build in a little bit more sports psych support, performance psych support, counseling support within some of our sports clubs with athletes? Because we still, and from what I've seen, we still very much focus on the technical world of sport, you know, up until maybe 16, 17, 18, and then you get a situation where there's maybe been a failure or a loss, and then it's, oh, you need to go and see a sports psychologist because you're broken and they need to fix you, which I would certainly argue that's not the case. But so that's still our mindset as coaches sometimes, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think maybe in places like America, certainly the professional boxers, even from even when they're young professionals, there's a lot more help available, because I don't think there's that stigma in America around people having mental health problems at various stages, or just needing to work on their mindset. You know, the whole kind of thing around therapy in America is very normalized. People quite happily say, you know, I'm going to see my therapist. In England, if you said that, people look at you and think, what's wrong with you? So I think that whole kind of stigma, shame plays a big part, where, for example, the other day, I had 3 guys in the gym. Jeff is kind of like my prominent boxer, and the other 2 were just national champions, just turning pro. And they said, oh, where's Jeff this afternoon? I said, Jeff's going to see a psychotherapist. And they said, why? And they said, you know, and they started saying, oh, well, our mindset's really, really tough, and And I thought, just you wait till you're at that level with that kind of pressure and stress, and then we'll see. But it was something now I know I want to introduce to all my boxers from the get-go, because when people say, you know, I'm really mentally tough and this and that, they'll be surprised when there's pressure, when there's criticism. And I think because we're in a kind of social media age where every criticism is aired before, Harry Redknapp, the ex-Tottenham manager, ex-QPR manager, said he doesn't read the papers because he doesn't want to see the criticism because Waterford ducks back. It's harder when, that means you don't look at TikTok, you don't look at Instagram, you don't look at Facebook, you don't answer your phone, WhatsApp. You've got additional challenges where you get criticised, and it really does call into question your mental toughness and how strong you are in the mind. And I think it needs to be normalised. And part of the stuff we're doing, certainly with amateur boxing, about raising mental awareness is just to kind of normalise the conversation and say, actually, you're not weird. You're not out this. It's just a normal thing that everybody experiences at some point. The only difference is maybe you're in the spotlight a bit more, and it kind of comes to the fore.
Yeah, there's probably two things there. One is, I guess, the whole social media world. You're right now, because it can be so painful, and we even look at this correlation between sport and life, is that there's an increase in bullying and online bullying at schools because it's now 24/7 access via social media. Do you think the first point is with sports people and maybe just boxers, from your experience, is that social media certainly allows me to build my ego up a little bit when things are going well? And we live in a world of sport sometimes that we win so much as a junior, and we become very successful very quickly, that failure doesn't hit us for a period of time. And when it hits us, we're not prepared for it. We're not ready for it. So winning is nice, and seeing social media say that how good I am boosts my ego. But that's my ego. That's the mental side, isn't it? And when the negative comes in, my ego takes a kicking just as much as my physiology takes a kicking.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the best bits of advice I ever got was from Adam Booth, who trained David Hay. And he said to me, never let the praise get to your head. He said, if the praise gets to your head, the criticism will you. And it's absolutely true, because people said wonderful things about my coaching, and I've had the same athletes at another point saying he's the most useless coach I've ever seen because they haven't got, you know what I mean, because they haven't got the way, and posted it on social media. So it can be quite damaging. I think with boxing as well, because at the lower level, most pro boxers, probably 80%, have to sell tickets for their fights. They have to be active on social media. So they don't, and those who are not active on social media don't sell tickets and don't get that interest early on. So the big promoters start noticing them. So it's kind of like a catch-22. Yeah. You have to put yourself out there and you have to big yourself up. But then when you build yourself up, someone can just come along and kind of knock you down. Whereas, 40, 50 years ago, a lot of world-class pros would lose a fight, and they'll just get up, dust themselves off, box again in a couple of weeks, win, and it's all forgotten. And it's good to kind of remind the pro boxers what it was like in the amateurs, because in the amateurs, you lose a fight, next week you're boxing again. You haven't got time to dwell on that defeat because you're boxing again in a few days' time. So you have to get over things a lot quicker. Whereas in the pro ranks, I guess, you lose a fight, it could be 6 months, sometimes longer, to get box again. So you've got all that time to kind of stew over the loss. You've got everybody who's seen the loss. So everything's kind of played out in public, in a sense.
Yeah, you're right. The more you put yourself out there, you more you open yourself up to your own vulnerabilities. You're talking about having the conversation with your boxers about, going and see a psychotherapist. Mm-hmm. Do you think that their response is pretty typical of, I think, as you mentioned before, the difference between maybe America and us is that we use this phrase, it's okay to not be okay. And I think we've talked about this previously, as well as the fact that I like the phrase, it's okay not to be okay, but I'm not sure we really believe that. And if I just take the group of people that I know in my area, is if I went up to them and said, listen, I'm having a really bad day. In fact, I'm having a really bad year. We've been in shielding for 163 days. I'm not sure they would say, Graham, I think you need to go and see a psychotherapist. I think there'd be sort yourself out, man up a little bit. I still think this old school mindset still kicks in a little bit, whilst we know at the high level that emotional intelligence and, you know, our mental state is very fragile. I'm still not sure on the ground in certain areas it's accepted yet.
No, and I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done to kind of, and it might take a few years to kind of get to that place where it is kind of okay. Because in fairness, we only just started having the conversation in anger the last 2-3 years, and it's gonna take a while. And you know, the vast majority of, you know, say in sport coaches, the kind of middle-aged, kind of still older generation, the young successful coach, there's few and far between, I think, in most sports. So the mindset's very different. You know, you've got a generation kind of post-war where their parents had to be tough, you know, because I speak to my mum, she had a very, very tough life growing up, given away, then come over here at a very young age. So when I talk to her about, you know, some of the guys, she was like, what are you on about? Tell them to this, as you say, kind of man up, get on with it, because, you know, when you haven't got food to put on the table, you've got 5 kids to feed, then you know about stress and all these things. But that isn't necessarily true, because we don't know some of the impacts that our parents had. Maybe they had mental issues, but we just don't know. It's just that it's talked about more, and it's kind of more recognised. So I think we've still got a way to go. But the more we keep talking about it, then I think we're making a start. And I think one of the words which we also need to kind of normalise is the word we're talking about, vulnerability. As soon as you mention being vulnerable, everybody sees it as a sign of weakness. You're weak, and actually it's quite the opposite.
And I suppose if we think in a sports context, we all have vulnerabilities, and coaches talk about them all the time. So they might say, you know, in my sport, in tennis, oh, Graham, you need to work on your backhand a little bit. Well, actually, basically what they're saying is that people attack your backhand. There's your vulnerability in terms of your technical part of the game. But actually, if you lose the first set, actually, you're not very good at coming back from losing the first set very quickly. Okay, well, there's my vulnerability as well. And when we link sport and life, you know, we have vulnerabilities all the time. We don't get an A at school. You know, we don't get picked for the football team. You know, you don't get to be the class captain, whatever it is. There's vulnerabilities all along that we just need to address a little bit, or maybe just start to define the word a little bit better, in the sense that it's not a negative, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for me to work on my backhand. It's an opportunity for me to do a little bit more research and a bit more homework. You know, it's a bit of an opportunity for me to be nicer to the rest of the class in order to get picked next year. In the boxing ring, and especially when you guys are training, how do you develop that environment to allow that vulnerability and allow that mindset to happen? Because I can imagine, even with tennis players, that there's a bit of a strut, there's an ego, there's a convertible car and bleach blonde hair mindset that comes with it. Boxers must have the same thing, surely.
Yeah, it's slightly different, but it's the same. For example, as I say, one of my boxers, probably their weakness is they're a little too open, very kind of aggressive, come forward, very difficult to deal with the style where you hit someone and you look around and they're still there and still keep coming. But still, at the very, very top level, these guys are all fit, so they can box you all night long. So they might come through. And just trying to get through to that was actually quite difficult. And it was difficult because of the tough man mentality he had. He thought, well, actually, you throw a punch, I'm going to walk through it. And just trying to get him to see actually being a bit more defensive minded, a bit cuter, a bit smarter, a bit cleverer, was seen as a bit of a weakness. Because when I was boxing, I hated getting hit. So I was a very cute, you can't touch me type of boxer. And people thought, oh, he's not all that because he doesn't want to get hit. But actually, that's a pretty smart thing to do. I mean, why should you get bashed around? You still got the rest of your life, and you can't, you can't even count your money because you can't even remember where it is. It's not good. But people see certain things as more vulnerable than others, and they see maybe the Mike Tyson's of this era, and part of the reason he was so successful because everybody wanted to be that guy who would just go out there as a wrecking ball and just destroy everything. Whereas a Floyd Mayweather, who some of his fights maybe not great but smart, didn't get hit, was very clever, wasn't seen perhaps in the same kind of light. So I guess to try and get through to them I've got to try and reframe it. I don't necessarily call it a vulnerability. I call it something that we need to kind of work on. And we watch a lot of videos to kind of ram home the point, because I believe 75% of the time you have to work on the boxer's strengths that they already have, you know, and I'd say maybe 15% vulnerabilities in this case, and maybe 10% of the time you start working on new things. And that's probably a reasonable way to go. Other people have their own different structure, but I don't believe in spending all your time working on your weaknesses, because your strengths are your strengths for a reason. And they're the things that actually got you in the position that you're in now. But you also need to spend time working on those little things, marginal gains, as they say, the little, you know, 0.5%. Did you get 7 hours sleep or 9 hours sleep the night before? Over time, that can make a massive difference, even though it's only a little thing. So there is a place to kind of work on the vulnerability, yeah.
Yeah, good. And I'm glad you mentioned about sleep, because we have the sleep geek on during this week as well, talking about sleep deprivation and how that affects your performance. And I think what's really interesting, what you've just said there, is this huge link to the outside world though as well, because you can almost control the boxer's mindset a little bit in the gym, in training, you know, when you're coaching with them, certainly when they're sparring, talking to them in between rounds, you know, if you get the right words, you can certainly control that to some element. What we can't control, and I'm really interested to find out what your thought process is the world outside of the gym. And I do a lot of work for UK Anti-Doping, and looking at the performance psychology of why athletes will then go back to their hometown and party and get caught up in social and recreational drugs, or get caught up in other elements that you wouldn't expect a professional sports person to be in, but you put them in a different environment and the world changes. So I think there's this huge link between lifestyle and sport. And sport and lifestyle, depends on which way you go. So taking an athlete from what we can put in a controlled environment and support them and look after them and guide them and mentor them, to then allowing them to go to this other part of the world, which maybe is not as controlled, and maybe is not as nice around our vulnerability. How do you guys cope with that in the world of boxing? Because that must be tough.
It's very tough, because we did some statistics last year, and 40% of all, say, amateur boxing clubs are in the top 20% most deprived areas. And that goes up to about 60% in the top 40% most deprived areas. So where there's poverty, where there's crime, you're going to find a boxing club. And all kind of, nearly all boxers start as amateurs. And if you imagine you kind of got a group of friends and you're all kind of growing up together, moving in the same kind of circles, and then somewhere along the line, someone breaks out, they found an ability, a talent, a vision, and they've branched out and moved on. I'm all for keeping the same friends, 100%. But there's also a need to kind of be wise. And I think sometimes it's that wisdom occasionally that might be lacking, because as your mindset changes, as you start thinking different, the people you hang around with have to kind of almost come on that journey with you, you know. And we've seen time and again, I've seen it time and again, guys who've risen above something, done incredibly well, just get sucked back into the same old, you know, crime, wasting, you know, be it women, be it drugs, be it alcohol, because they didn't really pull away from that side of things. And I think as well, there's a saying that you can't outperform your self-esteem or your self-worth, and I think that's a really important thing. Another reason why I think people need to be able to find someone that they can talk to on an ongoing basis, just to talk about their life, talk about how things are going, for someone who can actually help them, mentor them, counsel them if they need it. Especially, I think any kind of athlete, certainly every professional athlete, because it's those things that end up, if you trace it back, are the things that drag you back down to where you were before. Because, you know, you get to a certain point, and I in my life, I've had it many times where I was scared of success. I'd get to a certain level and then I'd do stupid stuff just to self-sabotage, so I didn't outperform. And then I'd say, I see, told you, knew I wasn't any good. I knew I couldn't do that one thing. And so many athletes do the same thing. They get to a certain level, you think this person's going to be an all-time great, and then next minute you pick up the Sun newspaper and you think, why on earth did they do that? You know, so and again, it comes down to the mental side, how they perceive themselves, how they perceive their life panning out. So you need help all along the way. But one of the ways to kind of answer your question, to kind of get away from that, getting dragged back down, is having someone else or other people in your life to talk to you on a different type of level, I think.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And my thoughts has always been, especially within psychology and working in performance psychology for at least 400 years, it's almost like, I think when I look back to when I was playing, and I went through a spell where I broke 15 rackets in 6 months. And I think there was probably some slight angry little child in there somewhere. But it was almost, there was no support and help there. I don't know why I was doing it. There was certainly frustration levels there. There was certainly some anger there. There's certainly some fear of failure and losing there. There was also maybe a little bit of drive, being a John McEnroe fan and seeing how he behaved, and starting to want to go down that route. But nobody said, Graham, listen, this is hurting you. This is hurting you inside. This is hurting your game. You know, you can't play for a very long period of time on your A game when you're throwing your racket and smashing and getting code violations. And somebody handed me a book called The Inner Game of Tennis by Timothy Galway, and I was 14, and I read it, and it made no sense to me. But everything about sports psychology in the 80s, there was like, oh, you need to be fixed. You're broken. And you're right. I think if we can start having the conversation earlier and younger, and in a more positive sense, the fact is that, you know, Roger Federer loses a lot of tennis matches. Manchester City and Liverpool lose a lot of football matches. And, you know, David Hay lost some fights. And that's okay, because actually nobody, or very few people I've seen, have got a 100% record and are perfect in everything that they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And even those sometimes that 100% in their records, when they retire, they seem to struggle a lot because the limelight's gone, and they're now in a new world of normal living. And, you know, we've seen it time and time again with a couple of boxers who retired undefeated, and then, you know, they've got other issues, alcohol, drugs, and you think, how do they, from being so disciplined and being almost so perfect, fall so? It is a real challenge. So it is kind of starting at a younger age, preparing people, but just normalizing that defeat isn't a defeat. It's just learning. It's just learning, and it's normal. But I guess in a sport like boxing, certainly professional boxing, maybe not amateur boxing, there's this mystical unbeaten record that everybody craves after, which means nothing. In the, you know, us in the game kind of think, you know, he's fought 22 guys, but he's fought 22 postmen. He's, no offense to postmen, please, but you know what I mean, guys who are just there for him to knock out, but he's got this. And when they lose, they think, oh, you know, I'm now 22-1. I've suffered a defeat, but the defeat, actually, you could learn more from that one loss than you could from the 20 victories that you had up to that point. So yeah, it is kind of reframing that and changing it.
Yeah, it is strange that boxing probably is one of the only sports where you have undefeated records. I mean, in the world of tennis, you know, you probably finished your career with maybe a 45 to 50% win-loss record if you're the best in the game. You know, if you're not the best in the game, let's say you're the 100th best tennis player in the world, which, by the way, is phenomenal, then they're probably finishing their careers with maybe a 30-70 win-loss record. And you go, well, that's mad. And the perception of that, especially with parents at a younger age, when they should be going through this learning and this growth period, when they should be allowed to play and evolve without fear, all of a sudden parents just don't understand the fact that, you know, little Johnny, who's playing underage football on a Sunday afternoon, they lost 3-1.
Yeah.
Not that important, is it?
Yeah, because I watch my nephew play football, and he's 8, and he's a very good player for Chestnut, one of the non-league teams for their youth side. And some of the parents, you think this is Premier League, or Champions League final the way they're carrying on, thinking let the kids just enjoy it, let them learn to win, let them learn to lose, but let them just feel their way into it. It doesn't matter, because no one's going to remember in 20 years' time that game you lost, on a Sunday League Park at 10 o'clock. Nobody remembers that, but they do remember how they were made to feel, how they felt playing and experiencing different things.
Absolutely. And I think that's almost the caveat for this progressive development of a conversation around your mindset, mental health, emotional intelligence, because I think if you start to understand that at an early age, you start to build the psychology, you build the mindset as you would build a technical element of the sport, more so than let's get to 15 and 16 and realize we've done no work on it and it's broke and we have to fix it.
Yeah. You've got to start almost, I think, obviously some athletes start later than others, so you can't always say start at 15. But I think certainly within a year of the athlete starting something, it's not wasted. And I think every kind of amateur club up and down the country needs to have some sort of, even a mental health champion, because obviously not everyone's going to be qualified as a psychotherapist, sports psychologist. It takes years to qualify to that kind of level, but you need someone at each club that they can come and talk to and say, look, I've got this problem. It's not related to the thing I'm doing, but it affects the thing you're doing. Because if you've got issues at home at a young age, that's going to affect, even if you come to the club, never mind how you perform. And it does make a big difference, because I remember when I was boxing, and oddly enough, often people kind of say, when you're going through tough times, you don't perform. For me, it was the opposite. When my best performances came when my life outside of the sport was kind of falling apart. It almost kind of galvanized me, because that was the one thing I had to kind of hold on to. And I guess if things were going really well, I wasn't as effective. So it was odd, but it's different for different people.
Yeah.
People respond in different ways to different things.
No, I agree. And when I was talking about smashing my rackets before, is that almost made me play better on the day. What I hadn't worked out, and in retrospective thinking is something which we all should do a little bit more. But what I didn't realize on the day is that caned my energy for the next day, for the next match.
Mm-hmm.
But emotionally, it was throwing me about all over the place, because I'm on court thinking, oh, I'm going to get rung up my mom and dad again. I'm going to get a code violation. I'm going to get a letter from the Lawn Tennis Association. People are watching me, and I'm pinging rackets all over the place. Yeah. Fortunately, I got them free as part of my sponsorship deal, which, the sponsors were probably thinking, well, we're not going to give him a new deal. There was all kinds of inner turmoil going on, even though the outcome and the results were fine. And one of the things I think with sports people, especially more so than anybody else that I work with, is this ability to game face, to put a mask on and pretend the world's a great place.
And I think that's what probably hurts the vast majority of athletes. I mean, on one hand, you've got to kind of understand it, because you have to almost be able to block everything out. If you're a singer and you're going on stage, you can't be worrying about the argument you had with your wife or husband 10 minutes before. You have to go out there, pull yourself together, perform. But sometimes I think we do it to our detriment. We keep the mask on when we should kind of take the mask off. And I guess it's knowing when to put the mask on, when to take it off, or when to just leave it on when you're going out. That's the difficult thing. But nobody really tells you when you need a mask. You've got to kind of experience it yourself. You've got to kind of say, okay, I've got this big match coming up. I've got this big fight coming up. I've got to be on it. And I think that's one of the reasons why boxers actually go into training camps, and they move away from home for a period of time. And it could be challenging, because you imagine if you're, say, someone like Anthony Joshua, and you 16-week training camp, right? You might train up in Sheffield, but you don't live in Sheffield. But you're living in another part of the country. Some, are taking guys away to Tenerife and into Las Vegas, trained at Mayweather's gym for a month. And you think, imagine doing 3 months. And I hated Vegas. Imagine doing 3 months in a place you don't like, you don't know anybody. All you see is your trainer, maybe the conditioner, maybe one or two other people and your sparring partners for 16 weeks, you're away from your family. But sometimes that's the thing that kind of helps you to kind of focus. And during camp, you can kind of let your mask go a little bit in a way that you can't at home. Because when you're at home, you've got all your friends there. They're thinking, you've got this big fight. They're talking about the big fight. They don't want to see you crying. They don't want to see you vulnerable. You had a really terrible day training, and we've all been there. Bad day. Like, has this guy ever boxed before? That bad? Or has he ever held a racket in his hand before? It happens to all of us. But it's done when it's done away from those outside of the sport. You kind of get a bit more grace because people kind of understand it because they've been through it. So some of it is about taking people away from their kind of environment, but then you can't do that on a normal level. So you need to try to teach people how to be real, be vulnerable, but also at the same time when to perform, when to kind of act up, because you need both. It's the truth, because
And I guess over the period of 365 days, you lock yourself away in a camp for 3 months. Everything's controlled. You're controlling the mental side as well as the physical and technical side. You get to fight day, and all of a sudden, I listened to Tyson Fury talk about it the other day about he wants to put on a show. He wants to entertain. He is a different person when he comes out for that ring walk kind of stuff. He struts himself. He's got the throne. I think he used the throne analogy that he had for one of his fights. And then you win the fight. And then probably have a bit of a party that day, the next day, and so that. But at some stage, the world goes very quiet in your head, doesn't it?
Mm. Yeah, I always struggle with, I guess, like the morning after the event. Leading up to a big fight, a big event. You've got weeks and weeks of anticipation. Fight week, it's just press conference after press conference, whatever. Then it's the day of the fight. Even as a coach, I feel it. And then at the end of it, win or lose, I'm like flat, absolutely. Usually a bit depressed, if I'm honest with you. I usually feel really, really down for the next couple of days. And people think, what's the matter with you? You just had a great victory. It's been fantastic. All the things that they would probably want to see, get on TV and get. But I'm like, is this it? I'm just completely drained, because then everything just goes back to normal, and you kind of back to the mundane. So it's knowing how to kind of balance that and how to recognize it, so you don't kind of get too much into a low, because obviously if the next bout is months and months and months away, you could be low for quite some time if you can't pick yourself out of that.
Yeah, we always work on a little AAA kind of program, but the first one is that awareness, being able to create the awareness of when that low is just kind of coming in a little bit. And it's okay to have a little dip. And then we start to have a look at the acceptance around the awareness as well, because you have to accept it quickly in order for you to move on. And while I was talking about little dips, there's a guy called Deion Sanders, who's an American baseball player and American football player. And he talked about this same process, that he would be in front of 100,000 fans shouting his name. And when we talk about ego and creating a cartoon character, his name was Neon Deion Prime Time Sanders. So I guess if you name yourself that, you've got to come with the big one from time to time. But then he would drive himself home to his multi-million-pound mansion and the number of bedrooms and toilets and swimming pools and cars. And he just said it was so quiet that his mind was just kind of rewriting narratives of what ifs. And he ended up driving his car off a cliff and tried to kill himself. Survived, and then did what a lot of American athletes do in terms of, they went down the Christianity route to try to find themselves a little bit. And he just renamed himself Deion Sanders. So this whole concept about people becoming athletes, becoming people again, that's a big transition. And you like the accolades of 100,000 people shouting your name. You don't like the silence that sits out after it. And there's a lot of research about Olympians as well, post-Olympic Games having this depression mindset. And from the outside world, we start to look at them and think, well, how is that possible? And I can only relate it to, you've had a job for 10, 15 years and you get made redundant. there's going to be a couple of days afterwards where you're just feeling a little bit lost. And how often do we have that conversation with our athletes between, it's okay. It's okay to feel a little low. You've had a massive high. It's okay to feel a little low, but this is how we're going to manage it. And this is the program that you need to have in place in order to make it just a little bump in the road instead of a car crash.
Yeah. I mean, I also kind of feel that we need to kind of do that post competing when people retire.
Yeah.
Because, that's the challenge, because that's when the phone stops ringing. That's when, you come outside the window and you don't see like by fashion, people forget, I remember that guy, but I can't quite place him, the things that, you walk, everybody would know who you are. And it does become a very kind of lonely place. And at one time you love the accolades, and another time you might think, actually, I'd just quite like to be able to go to Morrison without anybody asking for an autograph or bothering me. Yeah. But then when it's all over and it finishes, it's a challenge again. So it's preparing people that actually this is a normal cycle. At some point, I always tell my guys, at some point it's going to end. It's going to all be over. So enjoy it while you're doing it, because it won't last forever. And just when you think it's going to last forever, suddenly it could be an injury. Someone injures themselves and they have to call it a day. A heavy defeat and they can't recover from. Anything can be your last competition. So you've got to enjoy the moment while you're kind of in the moment. And I think that kind of helps.
Yeah, that's a great message. And I work with quite a few professional sports people who are in that retirement phase, in terms of, executive coaching, high performance coaching with them, and trying to look at redefining the next stage, because we all have stages of our lives. So you have primary school, secondary school, college, university, job, professional sports person. Then at some stage there's just another transitional stage, and it's almost like just thinking about it, it's a different round. You've won that round, you lost that round, what's going to happen in the next round of the fight? Because actually we all know the starting point in life. That's when you're born. Nobody knows the end point. And then this year, probably with COVID-19, is throwing a few more curveballs for a lot of people. So you're right about how do we learn to enjoy the moment now, but how do we take care of ourselves now? That's going to help us in the future. And a lot of sports people neglect taking care of themselves now. My thoughts were with you as a coach there is, how do you take care of yourself? Because we always talk about the athlete, and sometimes coaches are just as vulnerable, because they're trying to get their athletes on their A game, but sometimes we neglect ourselves a little bit. How does that work?
Absolutely. And I think, certainly in a sport like boxing, I'd probably say even more so, because all the attention, and rightly so, is on the boxer. Then I think next is probably the promoter. The coach is just the hired hand who you see. He probably does the vast majority of the work, but the hired hand who's just in the corner, hear their voice, see them as the bit part. But there's a lot invested kind of emotionally, and I guess you need to be able to take some time away and process things yourself. One of the things I did, and I actually started it kind of during lockdown, I didn't keep it up for many months, was about practicing mindfulness, getting up in the morning and just having a quiet period. At the moment now, walking is kind of like my thing, which I never had a chance to do pre-lockdown, because often I'd leave the house 6 a.m. and not back till 9, 10 o'clock at night. But now I can go out maybe 2-3 times a day, up to 3 hours during the course of the day, and just kind of think and just get my thoughts in order, process things. I think what's really kind of helped me is just to kind of enjoy life and not take things too seriously. So if one of the boxers loses, don't get too depressed. And if they win, don't get too elated, because winning and losing are both imposters. If you look at it depending on how you look at it, because you can win and actually not learn anything, and you can lose and actually you've moved further forward than you'd ever hoped. I think it is important to kind of look after yourself, and I guess the ways I do it, I enjoy reading, I enjoy walking. Obviously, don't get to travel anywhere at the moment, but just trying to find time to get away from the sport, because I think for a long time I was in it 100%, everything every day, every waking moment, but it's really draining. It is emotionally draining. So if things go badly, you're still into yourself because there isn't anything else to kind of take that. So it's finding something else, whatever that thing might be. Could be, just going to music concerts, reading a book, seeing a different place, but making sure that I have time away from the sport to kind of process stuff.
Yeah, you mentioned there about 6 in the morning and coming back at 10 o'clock at night, and people think a coach's life is quite an easy one. That's
Yeah.
a lot of hours. Finding your recharge, finding that that mindset in order to be on your A game, getting the right nutrition, getting the right sleep. I think that's something that we still need to substantially work on within our coach education system in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if the coach isn't on his A game, and I keep saying boxing is a risk to life sport. You give the wrong advice, make the wrong moves. There's a potential that guy may not be coming back home that evening. So you've got to be on it. You've got to know what you're doing, but you've also got to give yourself a chance. And if you get 2-3 hours sleep, you're grumpy. It's very easy then, because I've done it, I've seen it, and I've done it myself, where you kind of cut corners. You see something, you think, you know what, I don't want to get into that today. So you kind of let it slide, and then 2 weeks later, that becomes an issue. But had you kind of been in a position to deal with it 2 weeks ago, it wouldn't have been an issue.
Yeah, really interesting. I was talking to Kieran Brady about alcoholism, and we were talking about being a functioning alcoholic. But also, when I was talking to the Sleep Geek, we were talking about being a functioning sleepaholic. That the fact is that you don't necessarily have to get that many hours sleep, and you can still function. You're just not functioning on your A game. And like you said, some things just slide a little bit. The quality slides, and sometimes you can get away with being on your B game or your C game. But actually, our service, our ability as a coach, as a mentor, as a support staff, our service is to be on our A game a little bit. So we need to take more control of what we do first and foremost. Really interesting what you're talking about, this new program that you're delivering with boxing. Tell me about how that came about and why you thought that was going to be such a game changer for boxing.
Well, it was talked about for quite some time. We were talking about it, I guess, the last 3-4 years. And I sat on the England Boxing Coaching Subcommittee, where we were devising the new level 1, level 2, level 3 courses. And when we kind of got to talking about level 2, we said, actually, we need to start reshaping things. There needs to be something around the mental, emotional, nutrition, the spiritual, all of those things, because they play a part in an athlete's life. So any one of those things missing, their overall well-being, it's not holistic coaching. So when we kind of got to the mental aspect, we spoke with Mind, Matt Williams. I think Matthew Williams. Matt co-wrote the course material alongside Mind, and we developed this training. I was involved at an early stage, even before I was kind of delivering the course, and it took quite a while to kind of get it in the format. It's about 18 months. So it's actually quite a long time. Take this out, put this in. This isn't going to be, we did loads of iterations of it. And then when we started rolling it out, what surprised us was how well received it was, and how many people were already, I guess, hungering for something like this. So it's about time that this could, something like this is start being taken seriously. And sure, there's more we can do, but it's a great start. And during the kind of lockdown period, we had to kind of take it online, obviously, and we've delivered, I think, between the 3 of us delivering it, I think we must have delivered maybe it's about 60 workshops so far, and we're looking to resume the kind of face-to-face, visit each club in the country and do a full 3-hour workshop. But what we kind of found when we did the face-to-face ones, 3 hours wasn't quite enough, because once people start talking about some of the things which are going on, you can't say, sorry, time's up. You have to, and actually it's a pleasure just to hear people's stories and kind of what they're going through, and stuff that you wouldn't even consider. There was a young coach, I think in October, who took his own life, and off the face of it, it shocked everybody, because he just become a father, just got a new job, was in a steady relationship. Nothing seemed kind of out of place. Nothing, no one would have guessed there was anything wrong, but clearly something behind the scenes. He was unhappy, and if someone had been able to talk to him, to maybe would have made a difference. Who knows? But it's little things like that kind of make you realise that we need to kind of support each other and talk to each other, and certainly as men, just be real. I think it's more of a challenge for men than it is for women to kind of talk about your feelings, be more vulnerable, because as guys we want to kind of fix things. So unless we think someone can't fix it, what's the point in telling them I've got a problem, because they're not going to be able to help me. But actually, some of the fixing is in the talking about it and just sharing.
Yeah, no, I think it's a brilliant program, and I think as human beings, we all want to cry. We all want to be able to show that vulnerability. We all want to learn and grow. I think sometimes we're just not sure how, and we're not in a safe enough place. And because of the UK, which has been built historically on pubs and banter and Mickey taking, then there's a time and a place for that. And I sometimes think, if we can just get past that a little bit, we're all human beings and we all feel the same way, and we all have these emotions. It's just whether you're strong enough to show them, or whether you're in the situation, in the environment that you feel comfortable and confident being able to share and show them as well. So yeah, great job. You just mentioned one thing there about women, so I think, if that's all right with you, I've got one question for you before we kind of close. We've talked a lot about the men's game and boxing and the mindset of men. It must be slightly different for, I guess, women originally, maybe post 15, 20 years ago, when they were just finding their way into the world of boxing to be accepted a little bit. That's got to be tough. And I've worked with a couple of female boxers, one who's in Team GB at the moment, and we went through a stage where technically she was doing quite well, but then just didn't like getting hit. So as soon as she got hit in the face, then game plan was out the window. Windmills she started fighting a little bit like me. And we were like, well, hold on a second. You're in the world of boxing. You are going to get hit. But that whole mindset about, being strong enough to stick to your game plan or defend a little bit was something that we had to work on with her, but also going through injury with her as well before she won her first GB belt. This concept for me in my head is that there's no difference between men and women in terms of our emotions. We deal with things slightly different. The environments make us deal with them slightly different. Have you come across any women in the world of boxing where they've been more open, they've been more accessible to their vulnerability, or are they coming in with just a boxer's mindset still?
No, I think it's a very good point, because I haven't worked with any professional females, but I did a lot of work with amateur female boxers. The club I was at, we had, I think I helped 5 or 6 national champions, elite champions in the amateurs, and I took a number of girls all over the world to box. And one of the things, interesting stories. I had a girl over from France, and she was like a kickboxing national world champion, and she just started boxing, but she just couldn't make the transition between kickboxing to boxing. And so it was very frustrating for her. You think it's kind of similar. I'm doing really well at this thing, and I'm converted to this, and I'm getting smashed in the face every single time. And one day at the end of the session, I was in the back office, and she came in and she burst into tears. I'm like, what are you crying about? You know what I mean? Because I kind of instantly thought, if a guy came in, burst into tears because he had a bad session, I'd kick him out. I'd say, off you go, Yeah. And she started crying, and she was like hysterical, saying, this person was trying to hurt me in the ring. And I'm like, what is boxing? And I actually, not just through that experience, but from coaching female boxers, I actually learned a lot, because it helped me up my game. Because while a boxer is a boxer, there are certain differences, and I think how you coach a female athlete, you can't coach a male athlete in exactly the same way, and vice versa. There are subtle differences, little things even stuff around, like the weight making. If it's a ton a month and you're 2-3 kilos heavier, that's the cause of big anxiety, which men don't have to worry about that. So there's little things like that you have to kind of say, this is different, and you can't lose that weight in such a short period of time. So bodies are different, but I think the mindset is also in some sense different. In a sense, I do find female boxers, in my mind, easier to train in some sense. And one of the reasons why I find it easiest to train is if there's a problem, a female boxer would sooner tell me there's a problem early on, whereas a guy would perhaps try to mask it.
Yeah.
A female boxer would say, look, I'm having a rubbish day today. This isn't going well. That's not going well. That isn't working. But with a lot of the men I work with, you almost got to drag it out of them. You've got to sit them down, turn the video on, show them that it's not working before they accept it, even though they already know. So I think, I do find training females easier for that reason, because they're a bit more vulnerable.
Yeah, I have to agree, and I'm just having a little smile to myself there, because the number of people who come into my office, female athletes will come in and they will cry, and then they'll apologize, and then we'll put the right intervention in place to help them. Guys will come in, we'll talk about football for 20 minutes, and then they'll walk out, and it takes me like 3 or 4 sessions before they actually say, yeah, you remember 3 weeks ago when I was feeling bad, then this is why. And I'm like, well, why did you not tell me then? Yeah. And I almost related to going down to the pub, because your mate rings you up and says, Graham, do you want to have a pint? And you kind of go, oh, you haven't spoken to you for a while. Yeah, let's go. And you'll go, everything okay? And they'll go, yeah, that's fine. Everything's fine. We'll talk football. And then 3 pints. How are we doing? Yeah, everything's good. It gets to 6 pints before they go, Graham, my wife's just left me. And I'm going, well, why did you not tell me?
Yeah.
It's the same mindset. This sport and this real life correlation is huge. And I just wish we could miss the 6 pints out, because it's not good for my head. And get to helping them a little bit quicker, where girls are phenomenal at just going, I'm so aware of where I am. I now need to accept it and move on, where guys are just, there almost seems to be a lack of awareness at times about how they express themselves.
Yeah, and I think that bit is a bit that makes it harder to coach, the not knowing, is it me? Because sometimes you kind of doubt yourself. You kind of think, is this really happening? Have they lost that little edge? Are they a bit down today? You know what I mean? Because a female will come in the gym and they're a bit down, and they'll just say, look, I'm not on it today.
Yeah.
So you can have the session. And you can adapt the session to kind of suit what's in front of you. With the guys that come in there, you're right. Yeah, I'm all right. You sure? Yeah, it's all fine. But it's not, and it's almost a wasted session at the end of it, because you can't get through to them, and they can't respond in the same way because of whatever's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, mask goes back on, wall gets a little bit higher, deflect everything. They'll start, well, it's your fault, and it's raining outside, and there's flakes in the house. There's always an excuse. Bevis, I think it's a brilliant program. It's great having this chat. What I want to just finish on is that if you've got young boxers wanting to get into the game now, they see themselves as hopefully following a pathway into the world of professional boxing, what top tips would you give them towards working on their mindset first? What do you guys recommend they should be doing?
The first thing I'd recommend is make sure you have a decent amateur career, because boxing is one of the few sports where anyone can turn professional. It's not like tennis. You have to be a particular level or grade. Football's the same. Someone spots you, he can make the grade. In pro boxing, people who've had a couple of white collar fights decide they want to turn pro. We've seen it with the 2 YouTubers, horrendously recently, making loads of money out of it. The first thing I say is make sure you get that grounding, that amateur grounding, because actually that helps your mindset, because that gets you used to boxing often, winning and losing. Whereas you turn pro straight away, you have this 0 undefeated record to protect, which puts you under exceptional pressure right from the off, especially if you're popular and you can sell tickets, because then everyone wants to kind of protect you. So you're never going to be boxing anybody who's really good, certainly in the first little while. So I think that's the first thing that would help your mindset, in that you can accept winning and losing a lot easier. I'd also recommend a bit of mindfulness as well, stuff that they can do on their own as kind of part of their own journey. But I think also, I know sports psychologists are expensive unless you've got sponsors to kind of pick up the tab for this. But certainly find a lot of top businessmen have what they call like little mastermind groups, 2 or 3 or 4 people. I've been doing it myself the last 4 or 5 years. A core of 2 or 3 people who you can trust, that you can talk to, that you can share your feelings and your emotions with. That would go a long way to kind of offering that support, and the support we can offer is because especially if they're not in your sport, actually makes it better in a sense, because they can see stuff from a different perspective. I love talking to other coaches from different sports because it just broadens your horizon, because you find out there's similarities, but there's different approaches to kind of solving it. So there's some of the things I'd probably tell any kind of young athlete looking to start.
Brilliant, love that. The one addition to that is that if you're confident and comfortable going and seeing a sports psych or performance psych, then great, go and do that to build, not just to fix. And there's loads of stuff out there now which you can read yourself. There's free programs, free courses. If you're feeling that you're not confident sharing your thoughts, then you can still get help in other ways. Your mind are obviously there, you guys are there as well, but there's a lot of self-help and support books that you can pick up some tips, because having a bump in a road is fine. Driving the car off the cliff is just not acceptable.
Yeah.
And we have to look after each other, even more so with COVID-19, more than we ever have done before. And I think there's a little thing which was going around, I can't remember where it came from. It said, I'd rather have a difficult conversation with you about your emotions than go to your funeral.
Yeah.
And especially with men in the world of sport, we are vulnerable. We do have really good game faces and masks, but we just have to try to take one step forward into tomorrow and still be around tomorrow. I think that's an important thing.
Exactly right.
Thank you very much for your time, Bevis. It's been an absolute
pleasure. Brilliant. Thank you so much. All right. Cheers, Graham. Take care. See you.